Tonight's story takes you somewhere quiet. Somewhere the rain settles on every window like a gentle reminder that the city never truly sleeps. If you enjoy these calm, dark tales, you can leave a like and subscribe. But for now, just let the rain slow your thoughts, one breath at a time. I've worked the night shift at the Riverside Hotel for a little over 6 years. It wasn't the kind of job people dreamed about, but it kept my mind still, or at least quieter than it used to be. Nights like this were my favorite, when the rain eased the city into a softer shape, blurring the lights, cooling the concrete, and making everything outside the lobby feel a little more distant. The shift always began the same way. I'd take off my coat, hang it on the same rusted hook near the staff lockers, and make my way through the narrow corridor that led to the reception desk. Most nights, it felt like I was the only real person awake in the building. Guests slept behind thick wooden doors. The cleaners finished their rounds before midnight. Even the elevator seemed to move slower, as if it understood the hour, the rain, the weight of silence. When I sat down at the desk, I checked the reservation list, glanced over the security feeds, and listened to the soft tapping of rain on the glass just behind me. It was a rhythm I had grown used to, one that settled into my bones with a kind of weary comfort. But tonight, something felt different. Not wrong, not alarming, just quieter. A kind of quiet that didn't feel natural, even with the rain. I looked over the security camera feeds. Second floor hallway, empty. Fourth floor, lights dimmed. Lobby entrance, still, save for the dark silhouette of the umbrella stand in the corner. Then I noticed something. On the second floor feed, the camera cycled through its usual 3 angles. 210, 212, 216. But something about the space between 12 and 16 felt longer tonight. A stretch of carpet and wallpaper that shouldn't have looked unfamiliar, but somehow did. I leaned a little closer. Rooms 210, 212, 216. Just like always. But the space between 212 and 216, it appeared slightly darker, slightly blurred, as though the camera had trouble focusing. It wasn't unusual for the older cameras to struggle during heavy rain. Humidity seeped into everything in this building. But this looked different. It was the kind of distortion that made your stomach tighten without knowing why. Around 12:20, a man stepped out of the elevator, a guest I hadn't seen before. Tall, rain on his shoulders, keycard still in hand. He approached the desk, glancing around like he wasn't sure he belonged here. "Excuse me," he said quietly. "I think I'm on the wrong floor." I looked up from the monitor. "What seems to be the issue?" He hesitated, rubbing a hand along the side of his coat. "My room. It should be 214. I blinked. 214? He nodded. "Yes. But the door says 216. I felt a small, familiar chill work its way down my back. I had heard this before. Too many times. "Sir," I said gently, "you're in 216. That's your room number." He frowned. "No, I remember the woman at check-in telling me 214. "There is no 214, I replied. My voice came out softer than I intended. Something about his expression, a mix of confusion and something like fear, made me uneasy. He opened his wallet, took out the printed reservation slip. The ink was smudged from rain, but the number was clear, 216. He stared at it like it betrayed him. I must be tired," he whispered. He placed the slip back into his wallet, nodded awkwardly, and returned to the elevator. The doors slid shut with a muted thump. I kept watching through the reflection in the lobby window. The elevator numbers climbed slowly to the second floor. Stopped. The doors opened. The hallway camera flickered once, as if responding to something unseen. I leaned forward. The passenger stepped out. But the camera feed didn't show anyone. Just an empty hallway. I frowned. The distortion was worse now. A soft static trembled along the edges of the frame. The carpet looked darker, as though soaked in shadow instead of rainwater. Footsteps approached behind me. Light ones. Measured. Long night already? I turned to see Mrs. Hale, the housekeeper. Short, thin, hair pinned tight, eyes that seemed too aware of every corner of this building. She rarely spoke at night. Only when she felt she needed to. "Did you see that guy?" I asked quietly. "Tall, gray coat?" She nodded slowly. "I saw him checking in earlier. Looked distracted." "He said he was supposed to be in 214, I added. Mrs. Hale's eyes flicked, just barely, toward the monitor. Then down. Then away. "You know there is no 214, she said. Not as correction, but as something closer to a plea. "I know," I replied. But he seemed sure. She pressed her lips tightly, thinking. "There used to be," she whispered finally. "Before you worked here." My chest tightened. I had never heard her acknowledge it before. "What happened to it?" I asked. She looked toward the second floor camera feed, eyes dimming softly. "Rooms hold memories," she said. "Some more than others." Before I could ask more, she turned and walked down the hall, her steps barely audible, as though she weighed less than her own shadow. Her words lingered, unwelcome, unanswered, heavy. I exhaled slowly, looked back at the second floor feed. The hallway shimmered faintly, like heat rising off pavement. A place caught between frames. Between memory and forgetting. Something was happening tonight. Something the building remembered, even if we did not. Tonight, the rain had a different sound. Not louder, not softer, just closer. It pressed against the windows of the Eastbridge office tower like it was trying to get in, pulling along the ledges, sliding down in tired streaks of reflected city light. I was alone on the 12th floor. Again. The building was mostly glass on this level, designed for executives who only came in during the day. At night, it became a hollow aquarium, filled with dim emergency lights and the steady hum of air conditioning. My job wasn't glamorous. Night security for a building that didn't really need protecting. But it was quiet, and quiet was something I had started to value more than anything else. I did what I always did. A slow walk around the floor, flashlight in hand more out of habit than necessity. The overhead light stayed on enough to guide me, casting long reflections in the polished tile, multiplying my shadow in the glass partitions. Outside, the city was a smear of colors, red tail lights, white street lamps, and that distant blue glow from a billboard that never turned off. Rain blurred everything into soft bands of motion. It made the world look slower than it was. I checked the doors to the conference rooms, ran my fingers along the cold metal handles, listened for something other than the hum of the building. Nothing. Just the familiar silence, and the rain. Halfway through my round, my radio crackled weakly on my belt. Static, then a faint voice from the lobby guard downstairs. "Everything good up there?" "Yeah," I answered, lifting the radio. "Just me and the rain." He laughed softly through the line. Lucky you. Elevators have been acting weird all night. Power dips or something. I glanced toward the elevator alcove, its doors closed, the floor indicator glowing a dull 12. They're holding up fine up here, I said. Good, he replied. Call if anything. Glitches. The radio clicked off. I finished the perimeter of the floor, passing the large glass-walled boardroom at the corner. It was my favorite spot, if a person like me was allowed to have one in a place like this. The boardroom table was long and black, still faintly shining from the last cleaning. The chairs were pulled in perfectly, like no one had ever used them. The far wall was all glass. From there, you could see the river bending through the city like a dark vein, lights on its surface trembling whenever the wind picked up. Tonight, the view was almost completely masked by rain. It made the city feel further away, like I was watching someone else's life through frosted glass. I stepped closer to the window, resting my hand against the cool surface. The room behind me was reflected faintly in the glass, the table, the chairs, the open door. And then, as my eyes adjusted, I saw something else. A figure. Standing near the far end of the table. I turned quickly, heart kicking once against my ribs. The boardroom was empty. Chairs, table, open door. Nothing else. I looked back at the window. Only my reflection now. Long night, I muttered to myself. I told myself it was just a trick of angles. Reflections and reflections. One ghost layered over another. Still, I found myself moving a little faster as I left the boardroom, my footsteps a bit too loud in the quiet. Back in the central corridor, the office cubicles sat neatly in rows, all monitors dark, keyboards tucked in. The kind of order that felt unnatural at this hour. I was halfway down the hall when I heard it. A soft chime. The elevator. I stopped. Waited. Listened. The sound came again. Not the usual bright ding, but a muted note, as if the building were trying not to wake someone up. I walked toward the elevator alcove, my shoes whispering over the floor. The rain outside seemed to dull, or maybe I was just listening so intently that it fell to the background. The elevator doors were closed, but the floor indicator above them had changed. Not 12 anymore. Not any number at all. The display was blank. I frowned. Elevators didn't just forget what floor they were on. I pressed the call button. The small bulb lit up under my thumb, a dull orange glow. Nothing happened. No movement behind the doors. No soft whir of machinery. Just the rain, and the distant hum of the building. Probably the power dips, I said quietly, more to myself than anyone else. I turned to walk away, and that's when I heard it. Footsteps. Not behind me. Not in front of me. Above me. A slow, steady pacing overhead, as if someone were walking back and forth, directly above the ceiling tiles. I looked up. Of course, there was nothing to see. Just the familiar white panels, the vents, the soft light fixtures. But the steps continued. Measured. Unhurried. I pulled out my radio. Hey, you got anyone on 13 tonight? I asked. A pause. Static. No, the lobby guard replied. 13th floor's been empty for months. Still under renovation. The footsteps stopped. "Why?" he added. "Nothing," I said. "Thought I heard something." "You want me to check the logs?" he offered. I considered it. "It's fine," I replied. "Probably just the building settling." We both knew buildings didn't settle in neat, even steps. But some lies were easier to sit with in the dark. I finished the rest of my round without incident. No more footsteps. No more phantom reflections. Just the rain, keeping time against the glass. By the time I returned to the small security desk on the 12th floor, midnight had come and gone. I sank into the chair, the cushion familiar in all the worst ways. Old coffee sat cold in a paper cup beside the monitor, its surface thin and filmy. I glanced at the camera feeds out of habit. Lobby, empty. Parking garage, a few lonely cars glistening under fluorescent light. 12th floor, the same stretch of hallway I had just walked. 13th floor, black. The feed for that level was dead. No signal. Just a label in the corner of the screen, Cam 13, offline. I leaned forward, closer to the monitor, as if that might change what I was seeing. The other cameras flickered faintly with the motion of the building, small glitches in the feed, little reminders that nothing was perfectly stable. But the 13th floor stayed dark. My radio crackled again. "Everything good?" the guard asked. His voice was softer this time, like he already suspected the answer. "Yeah," I lied. "Quiet night." I turned the volume on the radio down until it was barely audible. The building hummed around me, a creature half awake. Outside, the rain carried on, steady and patient, like it had all the time in the world. I watched the dead feed labeled Cam 13 for a long time. Too long. And just once, in the space between blinks, I thought I saw a shape move across the darkness. Something tall. Something walking. Back and forth. Back and forth. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was the kind of shadow that only exists when you stare at empty places for too long. I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and let the sound of the rain fill in the spaces my thoughts were starting to press into. Whatever waited on the floor above me, if anything waited at all, could stay there. Tonight, my job was simple. Stay awake. Stay quiet. And listen to the rain. Some nights, the rain feels far away. A faint hiss in the distance, barely brushing the rooftops. But tonight, it pressed against the windows of the old harbor transit station as if it had been waiting for years to return. Most people forgot this place existed. It used to be the busiest transfer hub in the city, commuters, tourists, late-night wanderers. Now it was just concrete, flickering lights, and an unconvincing closed for renovation sign hanging crooked over the main entrance. My shift started at 11. Night watch, temporary contract, low pay. But the station was quiet, and quiet was something I had learned to appreciate. The main concourse stretched out in front of me like a hollow echo chamber. Benches sat in neat rows, still wet from leaking roof tiles. The digital departures board, once bright and busy, flickered with a dull blue glow, cycling between blank screens and old schedules that hadn't been relevant in years. At the far end of the hall, the escalators led down to the old subway platforms. A sign blocked them off, but anyone could step over it. There was no one left to enforce rules here. I walked the perimeter of the concourse, my footsteps tapping lightly against the tiles. It was a rhythm the station seemed to recognize, like a familiar guest returning after a long absence. The rain outside deepened, drumming against the wide metal awning above the entrance. Every so often, a distant rumble of a passing freight train vibrated through the floor. Halfway through my patrol, my flashlight caught something unusual. One of the old ticket machines was lit. Its screen glowed a soft blue, even though the power to that entire row was supposed to be disconnected. I stepped closer, the beam of my flashlight steadying on the machine. Its screen displayed a single line of text. One way, platform 2. I frowned. Platform 2 had been sealed for years. There hadn't been a train there since the city rerouted everything. Then the machine whirred. A ticket printed itself slowly, the paper curling out with deliberate patience. I hesitated before taking it. It felt warm in my hand, as if it had just been pressed into existence. The timestamp read, 12:03 a.m. The current time. Not an old print. Not a malfunction. As I stared at the ticket, a soft sound drifted up from below the escalators. A low, steady hum. Like machinery waking up. I turned toward the blocked-off escalators. The sign trembled slightly, as if disturbed by movement somewhere below. The rain outside seemed to fade, or maybe my attention had simply abandoned it. I stepped closer, peering over the top of the sign. The escalator lights, long dead, were glowing faintly. A soft, pale blue. The same color as the ticket machine. I tightened my grip on the rail, leaning forward to listen. The hum deepened, became rhythmic, almost like the breathing of something large and mechanical. A gust of warm air brushed up from the lower platform, carrying the faint smell of metal, oil, and something else I couldn't quite place. Then, a sound I hadn't heard in years. The distant screech of train wheels. I froze. The sound grew louder, echoing through the station's empty halls. Not fast, not slow. Just steady. I stepped back from the escalators, my heart beat louder than the rain. The ticket in my hand felt heavier. Almost intentional. The train, whatever train it was, continued its approach. Then the noise stopped. Sudden. Complete. As if it had halted exactly where platform 2 should have been. The lights along the escalator flickered once. Twice. Then everything went dark again. The only sound left was the rain, steady and patient, tapping against the metal awning above. I looked down at the ticket one last time, its surface cooling in my hand. Whatever had happened here tonight, if anything had even happened at all, wasn't something I was prepared to follow. I set the ticket on the nearest bench, turned off my flashlight, and let the rain guide my thoughts back into the quieter parts of the night. The rain had been steady for hours. Not storming, not threatening, just falling with the kind of persistence that made time feel slower. From the 8th floor of the Marlowe residential tower, the city below looked like a collection of tiny dim lanterns, each window a soft square of life behind glass. I watched them more than I should have. It wasn't part of my job, but on nights like this, it was hard not to. I was the overnight concierge. Which was just a quieter way of saying, the person awake when everyone else wasn't. The lobby was simple. Marble floors, a few carefully placed armchairs, a plant in the corner that didn't seem entirely real. A single lamp stayed on behind the front desk, casting a warm circle of light that never quite reached the far corners of the room. Outside, Rain streaked the glass doors, softening the view of the front steps and the narrow street beyond. I liked it when it rained. It made the building feel more like an island. At 1:30 in the morning, there was rarely much to do. Most residents were asleep. The elevators were still. The hallways upstairs would have been filled only with the faint hum of ventilation and the occasional creak of cooling metal. I went through my routine, checked the logbook, looked at the security monitors, walked to the end of the lobby and back, listened to the rain. It was on my second pass in front of the security screens that I noticed something odd. One of the cameras wasn't where it should have been. Not physically. Digitally. Camera 8 was supposed to show the laundry room in the basement. Rows of washing machines, bright white tile, industrial lighting. Tonight, though, the screen was darker than it should have been. The room was visible, but the light seemed dimmer, like someone had put a thin filter over the lens. One of the washing machines was running. I could see the faint blur of motion through its circular door. A small red indicator light glowed steadily. That wasn't unusual. Plenty of residents did late-night laundry. What was unusual was the timer display on the machine. From the camera's vantage point, the numbers were just legible. 0 o'clock. I frowned. A machine showing all zeros shouldn't still be running. I leaned closer to the monitor, tilting my head slightly. For a moment, I thought the numbers were flickering, not transitioning, not counting, just trembling between solid and not. The laundry room door on the monitor was closed. No movement. No one in sight. I glanced at the building's digital panel to my right. No alarms. No anomalies. Everything normal. I told myself that was enough. That whatever was happening, if anything was, didn't need me. But the longer I stared at the screen, the more something in my chest tightened, a quiet, persistent pull. The washing machine continued to spin. The timer continued to read, 0 o'clock. Finally, I took the small ring of keys from the drawer beneath the desk, signed my initials in the log for routine check, and headed toward the service elevator. The elevator was slow, the kind of old mechanical system that rattled a little as it descended. Fluorescent light buzzed overhead. As the doors slid shut, the sound of the rain grew muffled, replaced by the low hum of machinery and the soft clank of pulleys. Basement. The doors opened with a faint shudder. The hallway down here was always cooler. Concrete floor, exposed pipes along the ceiling, walls painted a tired shade of gray. The laundry room door was at the far end, a heavy, painted metal door with a narrow wired glass window. As I approached, I could hear it, the soft, steady whir of a machine in motion. I peered through the small window. The overhead lights were on, but dimmer than usual. Not flickering, just tired. The washing machine nearest the door was indeed running. Its drum spun slowly, clothing pressed against the glass for a heartbeat at a time before sliding away. The red indicator glowed. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air was warmer here, thick with detergent and the lingering sharpness of bleach. The floor vibrated faintly under my feet. I walked to the front of the machine and looked at the timer. 0 o'clock. Up close, the numbers didn't flicker. They didn't move. They were frozen. Yet the machine continued its cycle, steady as a heartbeat. I placed my hand lightly against the metal casing. Warm. Alive. Probably just a glitch, I said under my breath. Still, I pressed the stop button. The machine responded with a soft click, then slowly wound down. The drum spinning grew weaker, then stopped. The small red light went dark. I waited. In the sudden quiet, the rain 3 floors above seemed louder, as if the sound had found a way down through the concrete. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the machine beeped. Once. Soft. The display changed. Not numbers this time. Letters. Slow, stuttering into place. Door. I swallowed. It was a normal enough message for a washing machine. Door lock, door error, door not sealed. There were explanations. Except the machine's door was closed. Perfectly. And as I watched, the word shifted. Down. The overhead light hum grew louder for a moment, then dimmed again. I stepped back from the machine, my shoulders tensing. The room suddenly felt smaller. The walls closer. Behind me, somewhere along the basement corridor, a door clicked softly. I turned. The hallway beyond the laundry room was empty. Sparse ceiling lights stretched into the distance, each one holding a small circle of illumination. At the very end of the hall, barely visible from here, was another door. Unmarked. I had never paid much attention to it. Storage, most likely. Or an old maintenance room. But now, I could have sworn it had been slightly ajar a moment ago. Now it was closed. The washing machine behind me beeped again. I looked back. The display was blank. No zeros. No words. Nothing. The machine was off. I listened for footsteps. For breathing. For anything that might break the heavy quiet. Nothing. Just the faint echo of the rain, and the low, constant murmur of the building. I decided I had seen enough. Whatever the machine had wanted to say, it could keep to itself. I left the laundry room, turning off the lights as I went. The hum of the fluorescent tubes faded into silence. In the corridor, I walked steadily toward the elevator, keys cool against my palm. I did not look back at the unmarked door at the end of the hall. When I reached the elevator and pressed the call button, the doors opened almost immediately, as if the car had been waiting there the whole time. Back in the lobby, the rain sounded normal again. The building felt open, less tightly wound. I sat at the desk and glanced at the security monitors. Camera 8 showed the laundry room, empty, still, lights off. The washing machines were quiet. No glowing indicators. No motion. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. On the far right monitor, one of the cameras flickered. For a second, just a second, it showed the basement corridor. The unmarked door at the end of the hall was slightly open. Then the feed shifted back to its normal view, and the moment dissolved into the rest of the night. I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and listened to the rain. Rain has a way of making familiar places feel different. Softer. Quieter. More honest than they are in daylight. The old Northbridge Library was no exception. At night, its stone steps darkened, its tall arched windows reflected nothing but distant street lamps, and the faint scent of damp books lingered in the air like a memory that refused to leave. I was the night caretaker. Not an official title, just a practical one. Someone had to watch the building after closing. Someone had to lock the doors, check the rooms, listen to the rain through the old roof. The city had bigger libraries now. Newer ones. Brighter ones. But the Northbridge branch had been here for almost a century, and age gave it a presence the others didn't have. My shift started at 9. By 10, the last of the staff had gone home. By 11, the building had settled into its familiar nighttime breathing, wood expanding and contracting, pipes clicking softly, electric lights humming behind old fixtures. I liked the silence. It reminded me of moments between thoughts. The first part of my routine was simple: walk the main floor, check the side rooms, make sure no one had stayed behind on purpose or by accident. The library smelled of old paper and dust polished smooth by decades of hands. Tall shelves rose around me like narrow corridors of stories, their spines catching faint reflections of the emergency lights. Outside, rain tapped lightly against the stained glass windows. Each drop distorted the colored panes just enough to make the figures painted on them seem as though they were shifting in place. I walked past the circulation desk and toward the west reading room, a large space with high ceilings and long wooden tables. It had always been my favorite part of the building. Tonight, though, something felt a little different. Not unsettling. Just changed. At the far end of the room, one of the table lamps was on. A small brass lamp with a green glass shade, the kind that belonged in old detective films. The thing was, I hadn't turned it on. No one had, as far as I knew. I walked toward it, my footsteps soft on the polished floor. The rain outside seemed quieter here, muted by the thick stone walls. The lamp flickered once, barely noticeable. Its green shade glowed softly, casting a gentle circle of light across the tabletop. I reached out and touched the switch. Warm. I turned it off. The room returned to its dim, even lighting. I waited. Counted slowly. 1, 2, 3. Nothing happened. I let out a quiet breath, turned to leave, and the lamp turned itself back on. This time, the flicker was sharper, more deliberate, as if someone had tapped the glass shade from the inside. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the low hum of electricity and the steady rain outside. Faulty wiring, I whispered to myself, though the words felt thin, like they didn't want to hold their own weight. I walked toward the back shelves. The lamp's glow followed behind me, reflected faintly in the varnished wood. A draft moved through the room, cool and slow. It made the loose pages on the nearest table flutter just slightly. The building shifted, as old buildings do. I continued my round, past the genealogy alcove, past the small display of local history books, past the microfilm cabinet that no one had opened in years. When I reached the far end of the room, I checked the side exit door. Locked. Same as always. As I turned back toward the reading room, I noticed something on the floor. A single sheet of paper. It hadn't been there earlier. I would have seen it. I picked it up. The page was yellowed with age, the edges soft, as if it had been handled too many times but never thrown away. There was handwriting on it. Faint. Uneven. Just one line. Find me in the quiet. I stared at the words for a long moment. The room around me held its breath. Behind me, the green lamp flickered again. Once. Twice. The rain pressed gently against the windows, steady and constant, as if urging the building to speak. I placed the note on the table beneath the lamp, stepped back, and let the silence settle around me like a second shadow. Whatever the message meant, whatever story had been left unfinished in this place, could wait for another night. Tonight, all I needed to do was listen to the rain.